Canada's embattled Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is fighting for more than just his political reputation as he nears his official exit from office. He's fighting to avoid spending the rest of his life behind bars for alleged COVID crimes committed against the Canadian people. Trudeau has already lost his marriage thanks to his sordid past as a sex offender, but prosecutors say he's about to lose much more. According to insider sources, the globalist leader is set to be thrown under the bus and prosecuted on historical COVID-era charges once he steps down. The walls are closing in, and Trudeau's reckoning is looming. Before we dive in, join the People's Voice Locals community if you haven't already, and sign up to become a member of the world's first ever cyber nation that truly believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of your dreams. Visit joson.com and click the Join Us button today. It's completely free. History books will tell you that the Soviet Gulag state slaughtered 61 million, Mao's communist China crushed 35 million, and the Nazi regime exterminated upwards of 20 million. But if Klaus Schwab and his cabal succeed, their far-left technocratic world government will eclipse all that, and will witness horrors far worse than anything in history. Moderna CEO Stefan Bancel has openly boasted to his fellow World Economic Forum members that his company developed the COVID mRNA vaccines in 2019, years before the pandemic even started, because they knew it was coming. He didn't just predict it, he was part of the plan.
And I'm going to go with Stefan Bancel. Let's talk about vaccine development, because we've heard how it happened, obviously, with COVID-19 starting from 2022, and how extraordinary the process was also in terms of the speed. How is development, adoption, and scaling of vaccine going on when it comes for different variants and subvariants? Because this is one of the big concerns as we're all here now, and we're discussing, we understand the context, and this is a great deal.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for having me on the panel. So the great news versus 2020, where we are today, is we have manufacturing capacity. As Seth knows, when the pandemic happened, Moderna had made 100,000 doses in 2019 for the whole year. And I remember walking after Davos into the office of my head of manufacturing, and I say, how will we make 1 billion doses next year? And he looked at me a bit funny, say, what? I say, yeah, we need to make 1 billion doses next year. There's going to be a pandemic.
The COVID cabal thought they had pulled off the perfect crime. How wrong they were. The people of the world have woken up, and they're demanding justice for what could very well be the crime of the century, or perhaps the worst atrocity the world has ever seen. Even in globalist-controlled nations, the tide is turning. In Canada, factions within the government, those loyal to the truth, the so-called white hats, are now calling for a complete mRNA ban and full prosecution of everybody involved. And that includes the head of the snake, Justin Trudeau. Government officials in Canada have just released a bombshell report confirming a surge in deaths among those who received the COVID mRNA vaccines. Commissioned by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, the report comes after a thorough investigation by the Alberta government's COVID-19 response review team, which looked into alarming spikes in deaths among young people, teenagers, and even children, following the rollout of the injections. The report was quietly released late on a Friday, but its findings are nothing short of explosive. It calls for an immediate ban on COVID mRNA vaccines, especially for children.
So last Friday, after you guys have had it for a while, you put the Davidson report out on the open website quietly on a Friday, no fanfare. Its recommendations go directly against what you've said, where you prefer vaccine choice, not banning or pulling vaccines from the market. What do you intend to do with these recommendations now that they are out? Besides read them. Reading them is an obvious thing. But what are you going to do beyond reading them?
Well, I was pleased to see that we had a broad cross-section of doctors able to look at our previous COVID response, identify processes that were in place, identify things that may have gone wrong, identify things that are now under question, like the efficacy of masks and the efficacy of this vaccine in children. And so I think we're going to take a look at that, and obviously we'll make some decisions about whether to move forward on any of the recommendations. But the point of it was to figure out what we do should there be another pandemic that we have to respond to, so that we don't make mistakes that hurt people. So I was pleased that they came forward with a report. I don't have an agenda yet of what we might implement, but I think we always have to make sure that in a world where we care about science, that all voices are heard. That's what science is. You actually hear the different viewpoints. so that you can make solid decisions on what you hear. And I think restoring the right of doctors to be able to speak their minds without punishment from their colleges, I think that's going to be important too. Otherwise, politicians will make bad decisions. So this is the kind of approach you should probably expect from me, that I will always seek out contrarian voices just to make sure I make the best decisions.
It's not just Canada, where the science, which was apparently settled, is suddenly changing now that the globalist politicians are falling like dominoes and losing their control of the narrative. Experts around the world are now coming forward in their droves to raise serious concerns about the devastating impact of the elite's mass vaccination agenda. A recent study by leading American doctors confirmed that Moderna's COVID mRNA vaccines can trigger high-grade sarcoma, a deadly form of turbo cancer that spreads rapidly. You don't say. The study, led by Professor Edward Bay of SUNY, detailed the case of a patient who developed this cancer shortly after receiving his second Moderna shot. Which is all very interesting, especially in light of new revelations from declassified CIA documents regarding the origins of the coronavirus. A newly declassified CIA report confirms that SARS-CoV-2 was bioengineered in a lab with Pentagon funding in 2017. That would be the same Pentagon that had been funding Dr. Anthony Fauci since 2014. The very same year Fauci's pardon was backdated too. Just a coincidence, of course. Nothing to see here, right? Let's get this straight. A Freedom of Information request filed by White Coat Waste uncovered that Fauci's NIH and USAID sent over $40 million of US taxpayer money to a scientist in Wuhan, working on bat coronavirus emergence research. This same scientist later became patient zero for COVID-19. And the completion date for that funding was, wait for it, 2019. The same year that Albert Bourla said he knew there was a pandemic coming. Are your pronouns prosecute Fauci? The evidence is mounting, and for a lot of people, the only pronouns that make sense now are ones that demand justice.
But the bottom line is that gain and loss of function research is critical.
We found other coronaviruses in bats, a whole host of them. Some of them looked very similar to SARS.
There were studies done by two NIH, NIAID-funded investigators in which H5N1 were altered in a gain of function. There was a development of aerosol transmissibility in a mammal, which this particular virus did not have.
So we sequenced the spike protein, the protein that attaches to cells. Then I didn't do this work, but my colleagues in China did the work.
So in a very minor collaboration, as part of a subcontract of a grant, we had a collaboration with some Chinese scientist.
NIAID, NIH, certainly CDC, only funds and conducts gain-of-function research for researchers who are highly trained, skilled, experienced, and adequately regulated.
The answer is, Chuck, I don't know what went on there. I don't.
You create pseudoparticles, you insert the spike proteins from those viruses, see if they bind to human cells.
There's disagreements as to the scientific and/or public health value of these experiments. But I believe the people who feel that they shouldn't be conducted are in the minority.
And each step of this, you move closer and closer to this virus could really become pathogenic in people.
Senator Cruz told the Attorney General you should be prosecuted.
Yeah. I'd have to laugh at that. I should be prosecuted.
The modern-day Dr. Mengele isn't the only member of the COVID cabal feeling the heat as prosecutors close in. Justin Trudeau is reportedly a nervous wreck, scrambling for assurances that he won't face prosecution once he finally steps down after announcing his resignation last month. But for Trudeau, the tide has turned, and there will be no mercy. He's sold his soul to the global agenda, and now it's time to face the consequences. The clock is ticking, and the reckoning is coming.